So thank you very much for the invitation. Hope you can all hear me. Great. So yeah, I'm going to go first, and then Arash will take over on the second part, and then we'll have the question and answers. So hopefully you can see the next slide for those joining from home. I'm a consultant cardiologist, and just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm interested in medical education and population health. Okay, so I try and look after undergraduate students and also postgraduate trainees as well. Their well-being is very important to me, and how they progress in terms of their career is very important. Along with that, my interest is in preventative cardiology. So we're very good at treating, we're maybe not as good at preventing. And so I want to try and encourage myself and others to try and work towards prevention as well. And that prevention is helpful in terms of improving quality of life, but also trying to improve survival. And I think those things are part of the reason why I'm giving this talk, and I've been working in this area, because actually attack on healthcare workers and students, they're the group that I try and look after locally, but actually we shouldn't just advocate for those that we look after locally, but those that are affected elsewhere. And also this coincides with things like population health, etc., which I'll come on to. So as healthcare workers or students, we understand the sanctity of life. I think we all do, right? But actually we understand it a little bit more. And part of the reason why sometimes we go into the career is to try and make a difference. And it's not just about treating disease, but it's also about preventing disease. This is a quote, and whoever saves a life, it will be as if they saved all of humanity. Does anyone know where this comes from? Sorry? The Quran, yeah. So this is a verse in the Quran. Anywhere else where this is mentioned? It's actually in the Talmud as well. Okay, so the Jewish scripture. The wording is slightly different. I think it's whoever saves a life. It is as if they've saved the whole world. Okay, but actually this is a concept that's not just for people who have faith, but actually people who don't have faith as well. And it's actually something that's across humanity, and I think that's what we should be trying to push for. And it's also to maintain integrity and avoid bias, and that's towards each other as colleagues, but also towards our patients. And advocate for our patients, but also for our colleagues, and address social determinants of health. So again, this is something that I'm trying to do as a preventative cardiologist, is that we know that we can treat people with medications, but actually there are lots of other things that will impact people's health. And some of these things are outlined here. It's about education and access to quality, healthcare, and the quality of that healthcare, neighborhood and built environments, social and community context, and economic stability. So these are all factors that are needed.
Yes.
These are all factors that we should also consider when we're trying to look after our patients. And as healthcare workers, as physicians, we also have rights, right? We have the right to be able to provide the care that we have trained to give with safeguards in place. So we should be protected. And that's regardless of whether we live in the comforts of London, or whether you're in a conflict zone. And actually there are protections under international law for people who are providing care. So, Article 12 of the Geneva Convention states that medical units shall be respected and protected at all times and shall not be the object of attack. Sadly, what we've seen in recent years is that there's been increasing attacks, and actually there's been normalization of these attacks on infrastructure and attacks on healthcare workers. And this is something that I think I feel quite passionate about. I'm sure many of you who've attended today feel passionate about, is that we should be speaking up and not allowing this to be normalized. And on the back of that, a group of us wrote an article which was published in the BMJ Global Health. So that's myself as the first author, Professor Neve Gordon, some of you may know, who's also from Queen Mary University of London. He's a professor of international humanitarian law, and other colleagues who've written this from different backgrounds of different countries. And one of the obstacles that healthcare workers in Gaza and wider Palestine face is that we talk about the social determinants of health. And all of these are being targeted, and all of these are being destroyed to a large extent, right? Whether it's education, healthcare, neighborhood and built environments, social community context, and economic stability. So as a healthcare worker in London, when you work in the NHS, sometimes you say, well, we've got it hard. Imagine now working in a situation where all of these things are against you. And imagine, I think this is a thought experiment, that we work, a lot of us work in Berks Health, and we've got 5 hospitals. Imagine now that all 5 of those hospitals are not functioning. And on top of that, we have attacks or building collapses like Grenfell Towers. How are you going to provide care? Medications are not available. Antibiotics are not available. People are, kind of starving because they haven't got food. Imagine that was the case here, and how difficult it would be for us to try and manage that situation. Okay, this is what healthcare workers in Gaza are going through, and not just Gaza, but the problem is because of this normalization, some of these blueprints, if you want to call it that, are now being extended to other conflict zones. These are some numbers, and let's try and put it into context. So since October 2023, up until now, about 2 million people have been internally displaced in Gaza. And now this may be an underestimate, but 350,000 houses have been bombed. Okay, so that's over 70% of houses. So what happens then? People are displaced. Where do they go? Imagine now if your house or your flat was bombed, what would you do? Along with that, 40,000 children are being orphaned. So where do they go? 90% of schools have been damaged or destroyed. Where do you get the education? And so a lot of these people who have been displaced, then they shelter near hospitals, near healthcare facilities, because they think that that's a safe space. But is it? So this is Shifa Hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in Gaza. And as you can see, it's quite busy there. But even that has no protection. That's been destroyed. And a lot of these hospitals have been attacked, not just once, but on several occasions. So there are about 36 hospitals. Some of those the Shifa is the biggest one, and there are some smaller ones as well. But 36 out of 36 hospitals have been attacked to some extent, whether they're made totally non-functional or only partially functional. And not just infrastructure, but over 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed. Now, when the population, or the civilian population, is being attacked, and many have been killed, many are injured. So these are some of the latest numbers: 72,000 people killed. More than 93% of those are civilians. Even by the IDF's own accounts, they say it's about 83%, right? So minimum is 83%. Some of the other statistics suggest that it's 93% of the people who are being killed are civilians. And 172,000 or more have been injured, and many of these are life-changing injuries. So a lot of people who have amputations, who will not be able to function as we will be able to function when we leave this talk. And they'll have this for life, not just the physical, but the psychological consequences of this. Now you've got this at a population level, and you don't have a healthcare infrastructure, and your healthcare workers have been killed. I mean, I want you to try and imagine how difficult it will be in that situation. So you have a limited workforce, you have limited facilities, and on top of that, there's lack of food that's able to get in, lack of medicines that are able to get in, lack of antibiotics, analgesia, so these are all things that are kind of compounded as a collective punishment from the population, but it also causes a lot of moral distress and challenges for the healthcare professionals that are trying to do their job. And it's not just the healthcare professionals. Those who are trying to spread the message and expose what's going on, they are targeted as well. So 235 journalists have been killed. Again, The number of healthcare workers killed, the number of journalists killed is unprecedented. Okay, this is a scale that we haven't seen before. 391 UN workers have also been killed. Okay, and these are some of the pictures of foreign kind of aid workers that have gone in and they've been killed. So that you may recollect the World Food Kitchen staff who were there, and when they were traveling, they were attacked as well, and they were killed. So all of these things are compounding the situation that's there. And there are certain things that the UN experts, and there are a number of reports which I can give you the references for later on as well, have said, and this is a statement from August 2025, the targeted destruction of Gaza's healthcare system by the Israel Defense Forces amounts to medicide, some people call it healthicide, deliberate attacking and starving healthcare workers, paramedics, and hospitals to wipe out medical care in the besieged enclave. The system of apartheid targeting Palestinians in the occupied territory and the continuous attacks on healthcare systems in Gaza are straining the last remaining resources in the besieged and devastated enclave. Health and care workers have been continuously targeted, detained, tortured, and are now, like the rest of the population, being starved. These are numbers. And I think sometimes when we hear numbers, it's a bit abstract. Okay, so I think what we need to do is shift away from that slightly and actually put faces, names, and humanize these people. Yeah. So this is just one example. So has anyone heard of Rifat Radwan? Yeah. So he was a 23-year-old paramedic, and some of their colleagues, aid workers, had been attacked. So they were on a convoy to try and see what had happened to them and see if they can try and, I guess, save them or help them. So this was a convoy clearly marked ambulances, and there was a fire, I believe there was a fire engine there as well. So emergency vehicles, and hopefully this will play, but I'm going to play. I think it's not going to play. So you can look online, and you will find the recording of his last conversation. Now, what happened when he was going on his convoy? He was recording, and his colleague said, "Why are you recording? Don't record this." And he said, "No, this needs to be shown." As they arrived to where their colleagues were being killed or attacked, they go outside, and then suddenly there's a barrage of bullets, and that's what you hear in that report. That's what you would have heard in that recording. And this man is kind of calling out to God and saying, "God, forgive me." And he's asking his mother, he says, "Oh, mother, forgive me, for I've chosen this path to help people." And he was killed. Not just him, but 15 of the aid workers that were there were killed. And there's been some investigations that have been done, which suggest that actually some of the people who were killed were actually execution style at very close range as well by the military. And this is taken from recordings, such as his recording was from eyewitness accounts. I don't know if you've heard of forensic architecture. So Goldsmith University, there's a group of investigators there. So they've mapped this out. They've used whatever information they can, along with earshot, who look at audio recordings and looking at how the distance that people would have been away from and the gunshots and the number of gunshots. And they've recorded over 900 bullets that were used in that time to attack those aid workers. The Israeli military initially claimed that the vehicles were uncoordinated. This was incorrect. This has been coordinated with POGAT, and later called it a professional error. So again, let's do a thought experiment. 900 bullets, 15 aid workers killed. Professional error. I'll leave it to you to decide. Healthcare workers killed in Gaza, Lebanon, and beyond. So these are some data that are unpublished. So we've submitted it for peer review, taken from publicly accessible data. So this includes places like Insecurity Insight, which is an organization that collects this data, along with certain ministries of health. And this red line at the top here is Gaza. Okay, and this is when you look at the deaths of healthcare workers and you standardize it 100,000 population, right? Of staff, and this is what's happening. So these are the healthcare workers killed in Gaza. In yellow is Lebanon. Now you may look at here, and this is data from May 2025. Now this would have changed. More healthcare workers have been killed since then. Okay, and in Lebanon there are further attacks that are happening, similar to what's has happened in Gaza. And if you do a comparison of the first 19 months of the conflict in Ukraine versus what's happened in Gaza. So on the left, you've got Gaza between 2023 and 2025. So you've got the healthcare workers in red. So 6.3% of the healthcare worker population, or the pool of healthcare workers, have been killed. Again, unprecedented. Versus civilians, 2.1%. So again, this is something that's unprecedented, right? And as I mentioned, the 93% of civilians were killed. So you're 3 times as likely to be killed as a healthcare worker than you are as a civilian. Remember what we said about the Geneva Convention. As a healthcare worker, as a healthcare institution, you're supposed to have protection. This is the opposite. If you look at Ukraine, the numbers are much smaller, but you look at the proportion of civilians versus healthcare workers, this is much higher. Okay, but look at the difference between Gaza and Ukraine. Now, if it had been switched, and this graph that you see in Gaza was something that happened in Ukraine, then I'm pretty sure that our UK government would have made more of a fuss, or Europe would have done a lot more about this, or others. But as you said, because it's Gaza, and we can talk about why this might be, it hasn't had the same attention. So a healthcare worker in Gaza is 258 times more likely to be killed than a healthcare worker in Ukraine. Now, both of those numbers should shock us, right? So no healthcare worker should be killed, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Lebanon or anywhere else. But also that, if you're 3 times more likely to be killed as a healthcare worker, then it suggests that actually this isn't accidental. There is some kind of a targeting that's going on. And over 17,000 healthcare workers killed. These are a few of them. And what's happened is many of the people that are being targeted are senior clinicians or senior healthcare workers. Now, when you attack or when you target senior healthcare workers, what happens? The experience that they've had is lost. Okay, and so the care and the provision and the training that they will be able to provide is lost. I would like to think that I contribute to the education and training of the doctors and students, as I said. People like myself are being targeted, and what then happens is you have generational issues. Is that how then do you develop a healthcare force that has got that experience and that training? That will take several years and lots of training, etc., for that to happen, for that population health, let alone the individual lives that have been taken. And a number of healthcare workers have also been imprisoned. Okay, for healthcare workers, this is kind of old slides, and the numbers have increased. Were killed in Israeli detention, and these again are names. These are fathers. These are brothers. These are kind of children of other people. And I'll just give you one example. So this is Dr. Adnan Al-Ghosh. So he was a renowned orthopedic surgeon. Again, a senior doctor. He was the director of one of the hospitals. He was imprisoned, tortured, starved, and died in hospital. Not in hospital. He died in an Israeli prison. And this is just one of many that this has happened to, who have had this done to them. And over 300 healthcare professionals have also been detained. And there are reports from the UN experts and special rapporteurs who've shown that there's actually systematic torture that goes on in these Israeli prisons. And if you're a healthcare worker, you're not exempt from that torture. You're not exempt from that starvation. You're not exempt from the killing. This is another example of of a doctor, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who's a pediatrician, also the director of one of the hospitals. He was taken, and actually he's been in the Israeli prison for 500 days and over now. What charged with? No charge. Extension of his imprisonment. Again, the accusations sometimes are thrown, but there's no evidence to back that up. And imagine now, some of you are doctors, some of you are nurses, some of you are students. You get put into prison for 500 days. You don't know what you've been charged with. And for all intents and purposes, we were just trying to do your job and trying to care for your patients and your colleagues. So safeguarding healthcare workers in Gaza is important, because actually if we allow it to happen there, then actually, you normalize it and it will happen elsewhere as well. And it's already happening. So the tangible safeguards for healthcare workers throughout Palestine are absent, and most of the pre-existing infrastructure for saving and sustaining life have been damaged or destroyed. And we saw some of the reports from and statements from UN experts. Despite the personal risk and restrictions on resources, these healthcare workers, they continue to show up for work every single day. Okay, and they try and provide the best care that they can. Now, there's a channel for interview from one of the professors from Saleh, Professor Martin Griffith. He gave an interview with Channel 4 last year when he went. And he said that teams are doing what they can, but they're limited. They have no medications. They have no analgesia. They have no food. And so sometimes it's like you're putting a sticky plaster on a gaping wound. And the problem that's happening is that a lot of people are having injuries which otherwise could be quite easily treated. Okay. But they're getting infections, they're having to have amputations, and many of them are dying because they're not getting the standard of care that you would expect. And as I said, this normalization is not something that will stop there. It will expand, and already it's expanding. The targeting of healthcare workers. Does anyone know who these people are in this picture? So yeah, so on the left is Hind Rajab, 6-year-old, who she and her family were trying to flee an area where it was fighting, and her family members that were in the car were killed, and he was a survivor for a few months, maybe for a day or so, and she was on the phone to the paramedics and trying to get help. There's a film out. I haven't seen it yet, but The Voice of Hind Rajab, if you haven't seen it, recommend you do see it. And who are these two people? So they were the two paramedics that were sent to try and see if they can try and help Hind Rajab. Okay. And when they got there, they were attacked and killed. Okay, there was no, again, the story from the Israeli military was that there was some fighting between Hamas and the Israeli military. Again, forensic architecture and others have looked at the recording, etc., and there was no cross fighting. So some people call this a double tap attack, where you have somebody who's being attacked, and when the rescue workers go, they get attacked again. Okay, so the idea is that people who then try and go and save, so these are civilians. This was a 6-year-old girl. The healthcare workers or the aid workers that are trying to, save them or do what they can, they get attacked as well. And so again, if you look online, there's a recording with Hind, and what she's saying in that audio recording to the person who's from the emergency service saying, "I am scared." Imagine you're a 6-year-old child, or some of us have children. Imagine our 6-year-old child within that car with others who'd already been killed, and she's asking for help. And when help comes, what happens for that help? But it gets worse. So you have a double tap attack, and then there are reports of triple tap attacks. So somebody, aid workers go and try and save them, they get attacked. And then the other aid workers that try and go and save them, they get attacked as well. And now you've got quadruple tap attacks as well. So this is not something that's accidental. Okay, maybe one attack that's possible, but again, this looks like This is quite systematic. And how is it possible? How is it possible that this can happen? And it seems like there's no accountability. It looks like there's nothing that's actually stopping people. And actually, some of the media outlets, some of our politicians are not helping the situation. So maybe I'll open it up to you guys to put some suggestions here of why. But anyone want to suggest why or how they think this could be allowed to happen?
Brainwashing.
The brainwashing, yeah, that's one thing. So there's brainwashing, there's dehumanization. There's that instillment of fear. That unless we get rid of these people, we'll be attacked. But imagine us trying to justify that, or if everyone tries to justify that, what kind of chaos we would have. Any other thoughts?
My political agenda has puts the narrative to ensure that to kind of perpetuate what's going on again.
So just for those who are listening from home, so maybe political agendas and where the narrative is kind of twisted and the information is, you have maybe propaganda and potentially you have lies that are propagated to try and permit this. Now I'll give you some quotes, okay, about the dehumanization and the collective punishment, and some people who are kind of advocating for that or trying to allow that. So this is before 2023. Okay, so this is from 2018. The then Defense Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, said, "There are no innocent people in the Gaza Strip." Now, if you're somebody who believes in international humanitarian law, if you're somebody who believes in, kind of equal rights for everyone, this should not be acceptable to you. Okay. October 2023, the Israeli President Isaac Herzog said, "An entire nation out there that is responsible. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's not true." So this is after the Hamas attack, October 2023. So again, this is something that is being displayed by leaders of a country, and as I said, then you have brainwashing, and the public will accept that and believe that. Again, October 2023, Israeli Defense Minister and Israeli Yoav Gallant orders the complete siege of Gaza, not just Hamas, but actually the whole population, the collective punishment. We're fighting against human animals, he said. Now, you may look back in history, maybe at the last century, and there have been other genocides that have occurred. And the same rhetoric has been used there to try and justify the killing of innocent people, of people who are different to you, of people who you consider as less human to you. And it's not just the leaders, but actually there have been polls that have been done with the Israeli public as well. Since July 2025, 64% of the Israeli public agree with the statement that there are no innocent people in the Gaza Strip. Okay, this is from a poll from Hebrew University, Jerusalem. Another survey that was done suggests that 82% of Israeli Jews support the transfer and expulsion of residents of the Gaza Strip to other countries. Another word for that is ethnic cleansing. And this was reported in the Haaretz newspaper, which is the Israeli news outlet in June 2025. And 47% agreed that the IDF, when conquering an enemy city, should act in a manner similar to the way the Israelites acted when they conquered Jericho under the leadership of Joshua, namely to kill all the inhabitants. Another word for that? Genocide. Okay. So how is it made possible? So some of this is public, public opinion, that maybe it's okay, leadership opinion. And then there's a video, and this may not play, but there's a video that was being put out by the Israeli government and the IDF that this Shifa hospital was a command and control center for Hamas. And there were underground tunnels that were, carefully created, and that's where they were posing from, or doing the command and control center from. That didn't transpire. So when they actually attacked Shifa Hospital and they damaged it and they destroyed it, they didn't find this command and control center. What they found was maybe this little hole, so which they called a tunnel shaft, and said this was all they could find. So it's a false premise for attacking it in the first place. Does anyone know what this is? On the left?
Rotor.
It's a rotor. These are days of the week in Arabic. But now listen to this, listen carefully. So this is one of the IDF soldiers, and what he's saying, what they claim is that this is a Hamas terrorist shift rotor for the hospital, and this is what they were. These are Hamas fighters. These were actually days of the week. It was a calendar. Okay. This was aired by CNN. Now, you would think CNN would have some reporters who read Arabic, and maybe they may have warned them that actually this is incorrect. That happened. One of the journalists who works for CNN said, no, do you realize this is a calendar, these are the days of the week? They still went and aired it. So what does that mean? That means CNN has propagated this propaganda to then allow public perception, say, oh, this hospital must be run by terrorists, therefore it's acceptable to attack it. So this is false premise. No command and control center has been found. I'm a cardiologist and I do also do cardiac MRI scanning. Anyone been in a cardiac MRI scanner? It's a big magnet. Okay, so when you have a magnet and you have something metallic, what happens? It gets attracted, right? And actually, if you take something like a coin to an MRI magnet, it will fly. It flies like a bullet. So before you go into an MRI magnet, you've got to make sure that you don't take any ferromagnetic objects in there with you, because some people you may get stuck to it, or if somebody's in the way as a projectile, they may get hurt. So there are lots of health and safety things that you have to go through before you can go into an MRI scanner. What they claimed was that in the MRI scanner, there were guns. Now, this was a functioning hospital before. I would find it extremely difficult to understand as somebody who does MRI scan and who understands the physics of the magnet, that this would be plausible. But this was one of the arguments that was made, is that there are guns and there's ammunition within the hospital that Hamas is using, and therefore it's okay to target it. These are all false premises. Okay, and this is what's used. It's not just the dehumanization, it's the propaganda, it's the lies, it's the manipulation, and as you said, Arash, is brainwashing. And people, you would think, how can people who are educated, who have understanding, get brainwashed? And I think we've seen this happen in the past, and I'm sure we may see it again happen in the future. But these are things to highlight. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to finish up now. But there is a wider impact to all of this as well. So it's not just about the people, the civilians that have been killed, because that in itself is very difficult, but it's essential. It's one of the Lancet journal articles quoted. But it's also the dehumanization, and it's not just the dehumanization that happens, but it's also the silencing, the active silencing of voices that try to raise these concerns. As healthcare workers that work in these conflict zones, whether that's in Gaza, in Lebanon, elsewhere, you've got to witness these events that violate your medical and ethical principles, and it causes profound psychological distress and moral injury. And healthcare workers in Gaza and the global community from all faiths and backgrounds are affected by this. And it's not just them, but this will create, as I mentioned, generational trauma, not just for those who are the civilians who are attacked, children, parents, healthcare workers, all, but also the long-term population health consequences that will arise. So you can't even deliver the immediate healthcare needs of the population. How are you going to deliver the preventative aspects of it? So what can we do? I think Arash will speak a little bit more, but I think first thing to say is that, like these talks, we should speak. and we should ensure and we should demand the protection of healthcare workers, right, abroad and also at home. And if we allow it to happen abroad, sooner or later it will come here. And then when we complain, it'll be nobody's problem. And failure of international legal protection and political commitments, humanitarian caregiving, and consequences, and stand far beyond them. And what we need to do is to prevent the criminalization of attacks on health and focus on the human rights violations and crimes, including apartheid, including genocide. I just wanted to make a. You haven't seen this documentary as well, Gaza, Doctors Under Attack, and we're talking about dehumanization and silencing. So in fact, this was a documentary that was commissioned by the BBC. They paid for it. However, when it came to airing it, the BBC blocked it. And some of you may have heard about it. And one of the reasons they gave was broadcasting this material risk creating a perception of partiality that would not meet the high standards that the public rightly expects of the BBC. Now, some in the room and some who are joining from home may question the high standards that the BBC are claiming to uphold. And I don't think I would fault you for them. However, it was aired by Channel 4. And well, you would have seen maybe in the last few days that they actually won BAFTA awards for 2 categories. One is current affairs, and the other was editing factual. Okay, so this is something that was that the BBC tried to essentially censor. And there's a speech that's there, and this is a picture taken from Amnesty International's tweet. So again, stating that we refuse to be silenced and censored. And I think as healthcare workers, as healthcare students, as members of the public, we should also refuse to be silenced and censored. Yeah, I'm going to pass on to Arash.
So thanks, that's right. So I'm going to talk through, sort of bring it a bit more back close to home, and thank you for focusing our minds on why we're talking about advocacy and why it's so important for us, we think, to get involved. I'm going to talk through a bit around whether doctors and healthcare workers should be advocating for stuff outside of medicine, because I don't think we should take that for granted. So I'm going to talk a bit about the sort of philosophies and the laws that underline that, and then bring it to historical examples where people have been, where healthcare workers and doctors have been at the forefront of advocacy for different things, and then bring it back to advocacy for Palestinians in our own case at Bath. So thanks for introducing me. As Piri said, I do airways disease and infection at Works Cross, and I live locally to that hospital. I'm involved in work on green on sustainability, clean air, and also particularly lately in Palestine advocacy. And as a person of Jewish Iranian background, I think it's important that we sort of continue this very strong tradition of Jewish people being anti-Zionist and anti-racist, and I'd like to be someone who's part of that tradition. So to begin with, as I say, there's 2 arguments, there's 2 sides of this question of whether healthcare workers should be advocating and talking about things outside of their patients that they're looking after. When we look at the very basics of the philosophies of medicine, Hippocrates, there's nothing in there about looking after or advocating more widely than your own patients. So you first do no harm, confidentiality is important, it brings in professional integrity. And in addition to that, we do hear people talking about the importance of professionalism. That's in the GMC. It says you must at all times only advocate for things and only have free speech where there is professionalism maintained. We hear about the importance of neutrality or apartisanship or being apolitical, and why that is, it could undermine trust from our patients and the public if people hear us speaking outside of our area of expertise and say, your area of expertise, what you're trained in is medicine. So if you go and start talking about geopolitics, that's not right. But then against that, we've got things like the 2024 Good Medical Practice from the GMC. So it says, yes, make patient care your first concern, but protect and promote the health of patients and the public. So what does the public mean? We can make our own decisions about that. Is it just English people? Is it just the UK, or is it people more widely? We have the 4 principles of medical ethics from 1979: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So justice is telling us about something that's outside of just our patient who's in front of us. We can decide what we mean about it, but it's something to do with weighing up everyone's rights and everyone's health, and not just the person who's in front of us. And then something that really tips the balance is the idea of public health. So the Ottawa Charter is a WHO document from 1980s, which basically lays out the foundation for public health. And in there, you've got not just health itself, but peace, shelter, education, food, justice, social justice, equity. And so that's telling us that as doctors, these are our domain as well. And the idea of being neutral and looking after the patient who's in front of you, and that's your only duty, goes out the window for me. So why is it important for us, and why should we feel perhaps duty bound to do more as healthcare workers and doctors and nurses? Well, we're in a privileged position. We're time after time in every survey, we're among the most highly trusted of professions. So Ahmad, you're number 1, but we're number 3. It doesn't seem to get knocked too low, even when we go on lots of strikes. People listen to doctors and healthcare workers when we speak. So for me, we've got a duty to use that powerful voice to advocate for what's right. And you can see right down at the bottom, we've got politicians and government ministers and social media influencers who have a big platform, but people take what they're saying with a huge pinch of salt. So there's a proud and long history of doctors and healthcare workers advocating for causes outside of their immediate vicinity. The IPVNW, so the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, is a group that was founded in the Cold War of physicians, all sorts of doctors opposing nuclear war. That's got, in some ways, not that much to do with health immediately, but they have been an extremely powerful group of advocates. They won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1985, and they're still going strong, and their voices are heard on matters outside of just nuclear war. There's this person, Dennis Mukwege. He's a Congolese gynecologist who treated during the Congolese Civil War. There was a huge amount of sexual violence used as a tool of war. And he was treating a lot of these people, but also advocating more widely, so calling for people to be brought to justice, talking about the conditions that led to these things. And he had threats on his life. He survived assassination attempts, and he's been given a Nobel Peace Prize too. In anti-racism and anti-apartheid, we see people like Ivan Toms, who's a physician in South Africa who stood against apartheid and for the rights, for equality. And through his protest, he was in prison for years. He was beaten up very badly, had his nose broken. Also we see healthcare advocacy more lately, the Black Lives Matter anti-racism movement. There was a lot of showing from healthcare workers there. And then we come to the present day and climate advocacy, and we see a lot from our healthcare workers. So there's Health for Extinction Rebellion. We've got a GP from Bristol here, Grace Thomas, who was part of a group who took a letter to JP Morgan to demand that they reduce their funding of fossil fuels. This person, Prof. Cole, I wonder if Will knows who that is. So someone I always bring out in my bronchiectasis talks, my disease interest. He's one of the fathers of bronchiectasis. Discovered a lot of the cycles that perpetuate that disease. And he was a big civil rights advocate. In this time of the civil rights movement, he was active. And lately, in his older age, he went on hunger strike to demand action from the government on climate change. Went on hunger strike for 27 days. So he's a hero. So this idea that healthcare workers should stick to neutrality and should just stick to their job is for the birds, in my opinion. And here I am advocating for putting some pressure on Volkswagen to part in Greenpeace action to put pressure on them to drop
There's
diesel.
something you need to know first. This person,
So
they
we
know they
went
have to change. This person was scared.
And so we blockaded their headquarters as part of the Greenpeace action. Me and there was a nurse and another doctor that were there with sort of the visible points. Our voices were amplified beyond anything else. And after this, they announced that they were dropping diesel and they made a pathway to do that. So the idea that we as healthcare workers should be neutral on things like climate, things like LGBT advocacy, anti-racism, social inequality, and disability rights, doesn't carry any weight. Now we come on to our situation. So to put the starting point for this particular action that we're taking, in March of last year, our trust announced a new uniform policy. So this is Barts Health wide, Whips Cross, Newham, the London, Myland and Barts Hospital. That they had all the usual stuff, new things about infection prevention, control, uncontentious. And then this phrase in there, staff must not wear badges, lanyards or anything that could align them with a particular nation, political party or one side in a conflict, or causes that are not directly linked to and supported by the trust or the NHS. So this came as a shock to a lot of us. And we bit by bit found out that there'd been involvement of a group that's called UKLFI, which some of you may have heard of. It stands for UK Lawyers for Israel. This is a collection of lawyer activists who use their legal expertise to advance advocacy for Israel and prevent attacks and delegitimization of Israel. And they've got their strategy is to launch lots and lots and lots of small legal actions or legal threats to, in many people's views, silence pro-Palestinian voices. And there's a name for this. It's called SLAPP, strategic lawsuits for the public silence and the prevention of public advocacy. I can't remember the name. But they've been publicly reported for this by two legal monitors, and they're now under review. But using this strategy to create silence, so in lots of different environments, they challenge, sent threatening letters to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital to say that a display of artwork by Palestinian children was potentially anti-Semitic or hurtful to Jewish patients, and it was removed by the trust managers. A Palestinian CAD building workshop in Hertfordshire, again, letters were written. This could potentially be seen as an anti-Semitic action, and it was closed down. And then smaller things, so bus drivers who wear a Palestine pin, someone working in a garden centre who wears a watermelon, people working on airlines, a legal letter goes out, and in most cases, the managers and the senior people don't want the trouble. They get threatened that they may be breaking the Equalities Act by breaching the safety of Jewish people, and they just usually buckle down and do what's being asked of them. So we had a serious concern that that's what was going on here, because we knew that there'd been a series of articles from UK Lawyers for Israel citing instances of doctors, nurses, healthcare workers in our hospitals wearing a badge, and then an attached story about a patient that felt unsafe or felt threatened or felt that they may not get the same treatment because they'd seen that badge. And it's a reminder of the increasing threats against the safety of Jewish people. One thing that really struck us was that this, around that time, that this letter came out on the UK Lawyers for Israel's website, and you notice that the date that they wrote this, March the 10th, was more than a week before the policy was actually published. So it became very clear to us that they had involvement in creating this policy, and in fact, they were instrumental in creating this policy behind the scenes. And this policy, we've contended in our legal case, was not properly consulted. None of us knew about it, and there was improper involvement. They didn't go through certain pathways which are standard, like doing an equalities impact assessment. They put those to the side and rushed it through. So we had serious concerns about that. And here it just says that UK Lawyers for Israel Limited, this is their stated aims on their website. Among them, number one, in fact, is to provide assistance in providing or promoting legal support to combat attempts to undermine or delegitimize Israeli organizations or supporters as well. So this is their lobby group, essentially. So after that, we sat down as a group and tried to speak with some of the senior managers at the trust, and there was a lot of chin stroking and assurances that maybe we'll think about this. Maybe it became quite quickly clear that nothing was going to change anytime soon, and we were aware that you have a statute of limitations. So after a certain time period goes by, you're no longer able to challenge the thing legally. So we made a decision to instruct this law firm called Lee Day, who specialise in cases of perceived injustice. So they went after Volkswagen when they were cheating emissions. They've gone after groups that have attacked civil rights in various countries, mass action cases and things like that. And in around that time, there was this second incident where Ahmad, who's a senior nurse, was one of the nursing leaders at Whips Cross, was in a meeting. I better get this right now because you're here. This was his team's backdrop. He's always got some kind of cultural picture on there. This time it was fruit, olive oil, grapes, figs from his home land of Palestine, and he was picked up on that with a message from a very senior hospital leader saying that needs to go. It's potentially anti-Semitic. We know that it can be harassing for our patients, and that became part of our case. That even someone's identity, even a picture of someone showing who they are and what their culture is now delegitimized and taken as a point of anti-Semitism, according to this narrative. So that makes us think about symbols and about what symbols might be all right for a healthcare worker to wear and what could be partisan and make people feel threatened. So I'm going to put some symbols up now, and I want people to put their hand up or say if they think that this symbol is potentially offensive and shouldn't be worn. So Me Too badge, a lot of people wearing those in the height of that movement. Fairly uncontentious. BLM, so there were lots of those during the pandemic. There are people who say that that's reverse racism and what about all lives matter, etc. There's a lot of these about, so an LGBT rainbow lanyard, that is, of course, a kind of philosophical belief being displayed. No one has a problem with that, nor should they. And you can go even further, and there are badges with the NHS logo and with the rainbow flag and trans solidarity flags. These are all beliefs, but they're beliefs that we proudly defend and we expect our healthcare workers to defend, and they're not things that under a sort of accurate reading of this uniform policy, none of this stuff should be allowed. What about this? So Will, in one of our meetings, brought up the poppy, and we were told that this is apolitical, everyone supports the poppy, it's uncomplicated. How about this? There are all sorts of poppies. There are black poppies, which represent the suffering of people from Afro-Caribbean diaspora who died in war and have never been recognised. Purple poppies to think about animal suffering in war, white poppies to move the focus from commemorating warriors and soldiers to moving to pacifism and trying to end war. These things are political, these things are saying, well, should they be banned? And what about the poppies in Ireland? So, as you made the point, well, there are parts of Northern Ireland where COP is highly political and highly contentious. It's seen as synonymous with England and sort of unionism. So there are no symbols that are apolitical. Everything is political, and I don't think that we can try and make the argument that you're only allowed symbols that don't offend people, because you really going to come to who's offended, or saying they're offended, and why. And ultimately, you're going to have those conversations and make some judgment calls. And then we come to this one. So this is an important point in our campaign, because these badges were everywhere. Again, perfectly rightly, it should have been right for people to wear a Ukraine badge when Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And in fact, our trust was on the forefront of putting out these memos about how we stand with Ukraine. We're horrified by Russia's attack, and lots of advocacy and work about members of our trust who are sending aid over and how we can help, etc., etc. And we've seen the comparisons, in fact, of healthcare worker deaths in Gaza per capita versus Ukraine. It doesn't bear any comparison in terms of the targeting of healthcare workers, the targeting of humanitarian structures. And yet this suddenly we change tack and we're not allowed to advocate when it's about Palestinians. And in fact, one thing that one of the execs that we spoke to said in one of our meetings, which really stayed in my mind, was about, well, it was different then. The media climate, the political climate were a bit different then. And that really made us think, because that we should be thinking about what the media climate and political climate are impacting, and how that should affect us and what we do. So a little bit about the way the media covers Palestine and Palestine advocacy. We're seeing across the board really in the media, but obviously much more in right-wing media, these narratives which conflate pro-Palestinian marches and advocacy with anti-Semitism and hatred and even terrorism. Those narratives aren't questioned, and in some cases they're pushed very strongly, as unsurprisingly in the Sun and the Daily Mail. It's all about amplifying narratives about hate marches. And I went on GB News of all places to argue against the journalist and the host, who were saying that it's wrong for NHS staff to be seen on protest in their uniforms, because these are hateful marches and it's going to undermine trust in the health service. And I was making the point that quite the opposite. We should expect our NHS staff to be on marches for peace, and we should ask why they're on board from that. And then, even more seriously, the political climate. So, under Keir Starmer's Labour, there's been a curbing of our free speech around this. And initially, during the bombardment, we had Keir Starmer and other members of his cabinet defending Israel's rights to cut off food and water to Gaza during the bombardment. Keir Starmer, an international human rights lawyer, allegedly saying that we believe they have that right. We had the prescription of Palestine Action when they vandalized an Israeli weapons company. So the idea that they're not that they're a terrorist organization, and more than 3,000 people have been arrested, as you know, holding signs that say, I stand with Palestine Action, I oppose genocide. And then we have the conflation of an anti-Semitic terror attack like Golders Green in the same sentence, in the same paragraph, from our politicians and from our media class. Maybe we need to clamp down on these marches. And the insinuation there is that these are two parts of the same thing. And these are ideas that need to be very strongly opposed whenever they come up, we believe. When we come on to the NHS and Wes Keating, I'm so happy to say no longer the Health Secretary, although there's a risk he might be something even worse. He's someone who has a strong track record on opposing pro-Palestine advocacy, and he's intervened in independent GMC hearings of doctors who've been accused of anti-Semitism, in many cases by lobby groups like UKLFI. And so in the context of an ongoing investigation or judgment by the GMC, Streeting has, on multiple occasions, given his opinion in ways that have been felt to be very improper, that they haven't taken the right course of action. The doctor should have been struck off. Things aren't being done properly. So the politicisation of what should be an independent judicial procedure around doctors' speech. He's been applying pressure, and has obviously been applying pressure that uniform policies get pushed across the board, that he wants all trusts to have a uniform policy. And as I've said, we see this not as an idea of neutrality, but very much as an idea of, under the guise of neutrality, silencing advocacy for Palestinians. Part of this is how we're defining anti-Semitism, and many of you will have heard of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is highly controversial because it contains possible definitions in which opposition to Israel or to the idea of Zionism, so which status for Jews in Palestine, that in itself is a racist and anti-Semitic belief, which anyone who knows about the history of anti-Zionism, which has the most strong advocates of it throughout history, have been Jews themselves, who opposed it because they said Jews should be, there was an idea called here-ness, which means we should be here, we should be safe in our countries, we shouldn't have to evacuate and go to another country. So the idea that opposing, being an anti-Zionist and opposing the state of Israel as that particular type of political entity is necessarily anti-Semitic and racist is a false idea, and that's what is being pushed for widespread adoption, and then on the back of it, mandatory anti-Semitism training, so that everyone understands that you can't say this, that, and the other. So a few things to say about the future, and sorry, this is a little bit gloomy, but it's possible. But over the last year, it's been very clear that Reform is the most popular party, just in terms of numbers of people. There's a real possibility that they could win the next general election in 2028. So what would that mean for advocacy from people like us? We know that Reform have a strongly pro-Israel, unashamedly pro-Israel position, have a tendency towards authoritarianism. There are the people that are most strongly advancing these narratives about hate marches. You can see Suella Braverman, Tice, and the others. So it's likely there would be a real battle on our hands to protect our freedom to support Palestinians. And then alongside that, other areas, immigration, it's unsurprisingly for a far-right party, they've vowed that there would be widespread immigration crackdowns. What if they started to have ICE-style raids like they did in America under Trump? What does that mean for medical advocacy? We know that they oppose green policies. Farage has called them utter madness and all sorts of other things. So if this were to happen, the pressure would be back on us to think where our conscience is. And just because the political mood may be taking us in a particular direction, and our hospital leaders and our institutions may be feeling that pressure and may not be particularly good at standing with us, the pressure would be on us to think about what's right, regardless of the political climate. But some good news, some good thoughts. The tide of public opinion, as you would expect, is shifting very strongly against the actions of Israel, and very recently, the favourable opinions across the board in Europe, including our own country, have dropped like a stone. There are a number of very strong allies that we have in this space, and I think Jewish progressive groups are very important people. They're always present on these marches, and essentially their voice and their history and their work is being written out by these narratives that pro-Palestinian advocacy is necessarily an anti-Jewish feeling. What about these people? And then we have these advocacy groups like Doctors Against Genocide and Health Workers for Palestine, who are important areas of support have come up in these last few years. So lastly, what can we do and we can have a bit of a discussion about this if you like. But I think the most important thing is for people to find each other. And we've got a quite good and active network among Barts Health now, nearly 200 people. So that we can organise, we can support each other, people are aware of what's going on. And I think part of the reason for wanting to stop people wearing symbols is that when people can see each other and notice each other, that's how movements grow and build. So that's one of the reasons it's important for us to be able to display beliefs like that. I think it's important to join medical advocacy groups because our voices are louder when we're speaking as part of a group, as the BMA would be hugely supportive at their annual representative meetings and other groups. Attending protests as a medic is an important thing to do. So we amplify our visibility and our voice when we say I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I'm a physio, and I'm standing here. So defending free speech. So whenever we hear a narrative that's working to try and curb free speech, I think it's important to call it out. You can do things like write to your MPs and fundraise, obviously. And if you want to be a hero, like these people, you may be familiar to you. Some of the people in our trust that we're proudest of. Sui is a orthopedic surgeon, who some of you may know, and I think maybe she's still on the call. Many years ago, co-founded Medical Aid for Palestinians after having worked in Palestine, witnessed some horrific things and been in extreme danger herself, and continued to go back and work there. And now I'm glad to say that MAP is one of the most significant and effective charitable organisations delivering care for Palestinians and raising the profile. And we have Martin Brickers, as Mo mentioned, one of our very prominent trauma surgeons who travelled to Gaza, risked his life, his health, his mental health, and came back with stories and spoke to the BBC, spoke to Channel 4 about his experience. And if you go and do that, you can't help but create a bit of a movement around you when you get back. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll just leave our QR code. And if you want to read a bit more about our case, our page is there. And yeah, but if anyone feels like they want to reach out and ask more about it or get involved, please do. I think I'm pretty visible online. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you.
So people online as well.
Great. I saw my dad on there. He's still there. Is the mic here? So should we get people to come and speak here? Oh, hi, Slee, she's there.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Two wonderful speech. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Sweet, can we hear from you?
From me?
No, from my colleague. Sweet, can we hear from you? We'll just unmute her.
Okay, right. I'm unmuted.
Oh, there
Wow.
we go.
I really want to thank you guys for two such wonderful talks. I'm so sorry I should be with you physically, you see. But I'm glad the link works. I think personally, I think no matter how difficult it is, just think of it this way. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have the two of you speaking like that, right? So that's what Gaza has done for us. People hate it when I keep harping on Gaza because Gaza has made it possible for us to put ourselves forward, not to be afraid, to stand up for justice, and learn to be really fighting for justice without fear. And this is what we really need. I'm sorry that your generation has to suffer, but yet your generation will be honored to carry on the fight and win. It is not only fighting for Gaza or Palestine or other countries like Sudan and Congo, but it's also fighting for ourselves. Our country, I'm talking as a Brit now, although many people will insist I'm not Brit, like some of my Palestinian children. No, Dr. Sui, you're not British, you Chinese. Britain very, very bad. They make Balfour take over the country. But I'm talking as a Brit now. Look at what's happening to this country. You know, it is falling to bits because, you know, we have to really fight for the future generation. And in winning freedom and justice for Palestine, for Gaza, and the rest of the world, we will also bring it to ourselves. And I'm so proud of you. And also for the organizer of this, I want to congratulate you on this wonderful, wonderful session. I hope there'll be a recording so we can send it on to everybody. I'm
Thank you,
really
Sweet.
encouraged.
Thank you for providing an example for us. You're an inspiration to so many people.
I've been this long time. I'm happy to die now because I know you guys will carry on.
Thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask there's a current trend between medical students that they want to become content creators. So most of them they get into medtech or like well-being. And I also wanted to start like an account about politics and medicine, philosophy and medicine. But however, I attended a conference at King College, and this doctor was saying that it's very important for medical students to have a very nice interpersonality, because one day when they become a medical doctor, their patient will be searching their mark and seeing what did they tell us to, something like that. So we're like, maybe if I post something about war, politics, Palestine,
Great.
they would think that anti-Semitic, or they won't trust them.
100%. Has anyone else here been worried about posting stuff because they're worried what might get searched and how it might affect them job-wise? And I think to some extent, do you mind if I say something? We're right to be thinking about that. To some extent, to be worried about it, because it is important for us to write things, only ever write things online that we'd be proud to talk about and we'd be able to defend. And there are problems. There are doctors who have said things that were anti-Semitic and have rightly been sanctioned for it. And so I think it's hugely important for us to be advocating, and for us to speak loudly and confidently, and say things that you're proud of and you could defend anywhere, which are not anti-Semitic, but are anti-Israel or anti-Israel's actions. And I think everyone has to decide for themselves, because you could say, well, maybe I wrote something and I was completely proud of it and I could defend it, but I don't know what kind of asshole is going to be judging it and not give me a job. Unfortunately, that's a risk. If you're gonna stick your neck out, there might be someone somewhere who makes you suffer for it. But that's, I think the risk of that's overstated, and I think that's a risk that you've got to be able to take. There is some risk.
I think just to add, it is a reality, and I think a lot of people are worried. It's not just about Palestine, obviously, but other things as well. But more so about when you speak about Palestine, and I'll give you two examples. One is some of the data that I showed you about the graphs. So there are some students and also doctors that have helped them to produce that work. And we're going to publish it, but they don't have to be named. It's not that they've done something wrong or it's criminal activity, right? This is something that's actually going to raise awareness, hopefully save lives, or if not save lives, at least try and make a small change. But they're worried because they think that it may impact their future career, they might not get jobs, they won't be vilified, etc. That's a reality. But I think sometimes these are potential consequences you may have to face. And I think if we don't face it, who will? Right? If we all stay silent, then actually the people who are using anti-Semitism as a weapon, which then, it not just affects the freedom of speech for people who are trying to advocate for justice, but even for Jewish people as well. They will get it, because what you do is you dilute the effect of the word anti-Semitism. Right? But that said, I think, for example, this talk that we gave, a similar talk we gave in end of 2024. And actually the feedback was really good, really positive. And what I said at that time as well is, look, some of you may not agree with what we said. Your opinions may be different, and everyone's free, happy, open to have their opinion. But I think what you can't do is you can't dismiss the facts. You can't dismiss the reality. And if you want to do that, then that's on you. But actually what happened was nobody came. But what happened subsequently is about 5 weeks later, I'm not sure if some of you know this or not, but I got called to the medical director of the hospital, who said that they had received an anonymous complaint from a number of colleagues who work in the trust, many of whom, if not all of whom, had not attended the talk, but they had misgivings of the talk and they thought that it wasn't politically neutral. I went to see the medical director along with the Israeli Jewish professor of international human rights law who gave the talk with me, and we said, look, there's nothing intelligence here. He said, in fact, I've done some background reading, I've spoken to a few people, and we actually did it in a very considered way. And thank you for doing that. But what I want you to just acknowledge that some people may have different opinions to you. So if they attended the talk, and if they listened to the invitation to say we can discuss it and we can try and come to some kind of terms where we have disagreements, we can learn from each other. They didn't take that up, but in fact, that's what happened. So in a way, that's shame on them. Right? And since then, what we've done is we've actually progressed a bit more, and we've got together with colleagues who are like-minded, who are trying to stand up for justice and who are being local, and who know that actually they may be vilified, that there may be some accusations that we don't know. But what we are trying to do is, and we may make errors, I think we all do, is to try and do it in the best way that we can, and trying to achieve a joint goal of trying to speak up for colleagues, regardless of what their backgrounds.
Yeah. Can I say something? Can I say
Sorry,
something?
sweet. Yeah, on you go.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to clarify a few things about neutrality. I think both of you were present when we had a go at BMA. Neutral as healthcare workers, we are neutral because we treat all patients equally, independent of race, color, religion, and politics, right? So if I've got an Israeli soldier that is brought before me, and I know that he's been shooting Palestinian kids yesterday, I would treat him with the same care as I would treat my own brother or a British patient or a Palestinian patient. That's neutrality in medical practice. But neutrality in a sense that you are neutral when the world is falling apart, when a genocide is happening, or there's starvation imposed, there's poverty, there's injustice, you cannot be neutral on that. Because to be neutral on things like that is to be complicit with those who are bringing it about. So I think we've got to be very clear. In our compassion, in our human life, we are not neutral. We support justice. That means we hate injustice, right? We support Palestine, therefore we oppose genocide of Palestinians. But when it comes to treating someone as a doctor, we are neutral, meaning we are colorblind. We don't care whether he or she is rich or poor. We are completely neutral. Yeah, I think that's one thing. And the other thing about anti-Semitism, I've been called all sorts, don't worry, including white supremacists. So whoever wrote about me doesn't realize how I look like, okay? So I cannot be white supremacist. Ask any Palestinian children. Yeah. But we must know in our heart that real anti-Semitism is very, very ugly, okay? And it is a terrible thing to happen to anybody. but fake anti-Semitism, which is actually weaponized to silence us, we have to understand. So got to be very discerning. And when we speak, you see, if we are making a case of advocating for the victim, we can advocate without going to the top, right? So there's no need for it. So you speak up, but understand that you are not anti-Semitic because you don't hate Jews. You know, you don't hate a certain group. You don't hate blacks. You are exercising your right to support justice. So when you look at it that way, people cannot attack you, and make sure you get your facts right. All the things that you heard in these 2 lectures have got enough facts in it for you to actually speak about without being fearful. And I think there's enough of us around to try our best to support you.
Thank you, Sri. Yes,
Yeah.
really agree with all that. Anyone have any other thoughts or questions? Ahmed, do you want to come and speak? Because Ahmed's.
Speak while I'm sitting back. I'm loud enough. They'll probably can hear me.
Stay properly.
Okay, mate. So, the point out your question in regards to being fearful. There was a time that it was the exception and the very, very few would speak to the pro-Palestine. You could look at celebrities and professionals and all that. Now, the momentum is building. A lot of people speaking honestly and candidly about what's happening and their support of Palestine. We're not at the point that it will become the passion and the expectation for people to see the pro-Palestine. So you can be part of the movement in the shift and making that happen, or you can wait till others pave the road for you. It's your call. There will be a price, but again, it's your call and it's your judgment. But you can be a person, a people, as somebody said, a little professionals who will pave the way for others, and it will become the norm. Because if everyone is speaking about Palestine, they become a certain problem. But there is a single line of this. So that's the point. And with that, the question would be is how can we change, or how can we transfer a passion or an allegiance or an opinion into a movement? We have a lot of people supporting Palestine, but when we're not building enough momentum to influence or to change the public opinion is changing because of the facts of the ground, but the momentum to support what is achieved is not there. What's happened over the last few years politically to capitalize on it or energize the public or changing for political meaningful movement is still not there. So in your experience, what do you foresee about
that? It's ironic you asking me about that, because you're the person who knows. He's addressed thousands of people at rallies. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, and Sui is the person to talk about it, but I think it's just lots of small movements, isn't it? And lots of people using their voice as strongly as they can. So your voice is quiet when you do something small, like write to your MP as a citizen, or sign a petition. It's something, but it's not very powerful. But because we've got this loud, if we go to a rally and say who we are, there's a good chance they'll want us to speak there. If I say I'm Jewish, then I've got a special privilege there to speak, so I use that. If you're part of an organization, then you join a group of other powerful people, and then I think it's about leveraging everything you can and finding the points where there's the highest return, where a bit of effort yields a lot. like an opportunity like this trial to raise awareness and potentially has echo throughout the country when West Street is trying to weaponize it in this way. It's about finding those opportunities and make your voice as loud as it can be, really.
The question online, can you answered it? Can you make a comment on the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism as part of mandatory training for NHS staff?
Yeah, why don't you say something about it? I think my views on it would probably appear.
But one of the things I'll say maybe is just use some GMC data. So between October 2023 up until I think it was November last year, there were about 771 referrals to the GMC for anti-Semitism. About 90 or 93% of those were closed at triage. So they have no merit. Okay, so that's a large number. And so a lot of the referrals that are going in, people are threatening healthcare workers, saying, don't speak, otherwise we'll report you to the GMC. People have done that. There are newspapers, there are lobby groups that have done that. And there's an intention behind that. And what they often use is the IHRA definition. Now, strictly the IHRA definition should be there to protect Jewish people. But there are scholars, Holocaust scholars, genocide scholars who are Jewish, who say that actually it is being weaponized to protect the state of Israel over Jewish people.
And that even further than that would say that it endangers Jewish people very severely, because by constantly putting forward a narrative that Jewish people like what's going on, if you criticize what's going on, or you criticize Israel, you're criticizing Jews because they're all supporting it. You're placing them in danger because you're telling people that can see that those horrific things that you've shown us, and then they little by little being told, oh, all these Jews that you see in the street, they like that. And that's not true. And that narrative endangers Jews and creates hatred for Jews. And that's why it's important, even for Jewish people, on top of everything else, to fight against this conflation.
And I think sometimes when you do try and put some religions or ethnicities above others, you're actually creating issues, because then there will be discontent, there will be inequity. And so rather than trying to do that, you do it across the board. So if you're anti-racist, it should be anti-racist against any kind of racial discrimination, you know, whether it's against Jewish people, against Asians, against blacks, whatever it might be, you know, Jewish religion, Islam, you know, Muslims, etc. Religions, you should be against all of those ills. If you speak about one and then you try and silence the other, then it becomes problematic. I think that's where there's, you know, it doesn't help really anyone in the short term, but in the long term, then it becomes detrimental, not just to a small group, but then it expand.
I think we should probably wrap up quite soon after this.
I can do this on the.
No, I'd like to.
It's actually very short. One is, what is the actual position about adoption of the definition of anti-Semitism in the NHS at the moment? So basically, so it should be, I'm not saying where it stands. Two, people who are still aware of the hints and stuff, or they actively being rooted down and sort of remove them. And the last point, it's not enough of the narrative, for example, those pictures that were taken down in Chelsea Westminster, because some people were offended. I think we should basically think about people be offended, you know, you can be offended, that's your choice of how you feel about that. What there has to be is some actual evidence that it is
Some kind of reckoning, yeah.
That you could be offended by it, but if there's no evidence of the threat to you or risk you, which picture on the wall would not be, you know, there's not enough of that, I think, being said or fought back against, you know, people being offended, you know, I'm offended by something, but you know, but be offended, I know that's not a danger, you know, I don't like certain, you know, respect, but, you know, we live in England and we are free to have
I know, that's what I think is so important. I mean, what if there are people who are offended by an LGBT or a trans badge? There definitely are. And what would we say if they complained to the director and said, I'm anti-trans actually, and that offends me? Well, they would say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we're proud to support those people, and case closed. So there has to be some kind of arbitration, I agree. On the question of the badge, are people still wearing them? People occasionally are still wearing them, and they are sort of being hunted down. So we hear about cases, and we're sort of collecting instances of it, because it builds a case that, you know, X people have had a Jamaica flag or whatever flag, and no one batted an eyelid. It's one kind of flag that's being looked for and being reported, and this is not a neutral policy. This is a policy that's fed to us as neutrality. And there's aside from the flags, there are a few other instances that we feel have shown this for what it is, where a few national celebrations which the trust has decided to get behind. So Philippines Independence Day, Jamaica Independence Day. What was the other? Was another one? No, Ghana. No one bats an eyelid, but rightly they shouldn't. But we actually did an experiment and proposed a Palestinian Independence Day, because there is a Palestinian Independence Day. It's proposed by, is it Edward Said or someone like that?
Yeah.
And it's a recognised day. And it got almost to the stage of us putting it up. They got through all the well-being people and the community network. I validated it. They gave us signs, they gave us a room, everyone bought food. And a couple of days before it got canned unceremoniously, all the posters removed. And it's all building a picture which is actually useful for us. And on the question about the IHRA adoption, I don't know any more than, but do you know anything about that? About whether they're moving forward on enforcing the mandatory IHRA adoption? I don't think they can within trusts, can they? They can't. The health secretary doesn't have that power to decide. They can just pressurize them. They can tell NHS England what to do, and they've said that we've mandated that NHS England adopts that definition, but they can't force trusts to do it. But they can just put a lot of pressure on them.
My understanding is national, like UK government national policy to accept that definition. So unrelated to the NHS and unrelated to health, I believe that the UK government thinks it. Don't have to leave the program. That was my understanding.
The challenge with that, and the advantage and the problem in the same way, is the legal structure for the NHS. So NHS England means advise and recommendation to the Department of Health. NHS England choose to follow these instructions, but each trust is a separate body, and they have the autonomy to follow all the law. So the health workers for the website trying to challenge legally the IHR definition by NHS England, but failed because of that structure.
You have to be a staff member that's under that policy to be allowed to challenge it, so they weren't allowed to challenge it.
To the individual trusts that adopt or not adopt that.
Can I say something about the IHRA?
Yeah.
Okay, right. I think some of our colleagues are trying to have this debated at the BMA ARM conference in Brighton, and make it a BMA recommendation that doctors should not be forced to do it. So I don't know what the outcome, because it's going to happen in 2 months' time. I will tell you, as a person, I'm going to write back to management and say, unless you also have an equivalent module on anti-Palestinian racism, I'm not going to do IRSI. It's not I refuse to do it. You have to be fair, right? You allow people to be anti-Palestinian, but then you put in this IHRA, which actually not every single Jew agree. Because I remember when there was a debate about adopting it in this country, a lot of eminent Jewish scholars, including people like Professor Avi Shlem and all that, have come out and said, look, we can support the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism, but we cannot support this. So they cannot force us to do it.
That's a big problem. And then even one of the authors of the original IHR definition.
Yeah, can't hear you. Yeah. Yeah,
Even one of the authors of the original IHR definition.
Yes.
Was kind of
correct. Yeah.
I think it was an article in the Guardian and elsewhere where he said that actually it is being used for purposes that it wasn't originally designed for. It's being used to weaponize and silence debate. And he himself has said that that's not a healthy way to go.
Yeah. It's extremely divisive.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for our strong speakers.
Thank you.